Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday. On September 1st, 2022, President Joe Biden gave the single most divisive, loathsome, and unforgivable speech ever given by an American president in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Silhouetted by a blood-red background and two optional Marines stationed behind him like the masked Imperial Guards in a Star Wars movie, Biden mounted the stage in an address to the nation that would go down in infamy. Biden, deep into stage 4 prostate cancer and increasingly worse dementia that would later get unmasked about 2 years later, sounded the part of a nursing home patient gone completely insane. He raised his fists and screamed for nearly an hour about quote-unquote ultra-MAGA extremists who were threatening to destroy the American Republic as we once knew it. Democracy, a world that Democrats still cannot define to this day, was on the brink, apparently. So what did Biden say exactly led to democracy being on the brink? The good news about senile old men is that without fail, they will tell you exactly what they are thinking if you give them enough time to do so. They do not mince words. They are, if you're open enough to the idea, the most honest demographic on the face of the planet. Their time has passed, so they are incredibly eager to tell you what they think of the one they currently inhabit. And Joe Biden was no different that September night in Philadelphia. The reason why democracy was on the brink, why they were trying to throw Donald Trump in jail, why America was falling apart at the seams was, to them, very simple. White supremacy. Particularly in the aftermath of January 6th, the Democratic Party became obsessed with their certainty that it was white supremacy that was going to be the downfall of America. They were the ones who had sieged the Capitol building. They were the ones who were shooting unarmed black men in traffic stops. They were the ones who were conspiring behind the scenes to return America to the unforgivable, a racist hellscape defined by misogyny, nationalism, and patriarchy. But while it's certainly true that white supremacy is evil and reprehensible, which it obviously is, the biggest threat to America? Really? We have had a lot of threats to America. The increasing de-dollarization that threatens our currency that is based on the power of the US dollar, which is diminishing all around the world as we speak right now. Our rapid national debt is escalating due to wars, bank bailouts, and social entitlement programs. Foreign influences like China that are increasingly putting America into a stranglehold, complete decay of the family and social order that is bleeding into all and more of these things. To me, and I would bet many of you, these would take the cake over white supremacy, whatever that means, by the way, any day of the week. But the funny thing was, that conclusion didn't dawn on any of the most influential members of the Biden administration. Particularly in the case of young white men, such as Kyle Rittenhouse, for one example, who they dragged through the mud for years for the simple crime of defending himself in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The leftist tyranny we experienced for those 4 years was something we'd never before seen. For example, Merrick Garland, Biden's attorney general, had this to say on the explosion of white supremacy mania, quote, "In my career, I have never seen a more dangerous threat to democracy than the invasion of the Capitol. The top domestic violence extremist threat that we face comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race." End quote. Huh? That was new. How about when the White House was set on fire in the War of 1812? When we were attacked on 9/11 or Pearl Harbor? When Jim Crow was instituted throughout the South? When anything of the bombings or school shootings have been happening throughout the United States for the past 30 years? Wouldn't those be more of a sign of a threat of democracy than quote-unquote white supremacy? In any sane person's mind, there would be no way that would be the case. But that didn't matter, because Merrick Garland, the top federal law enforcement officer in the United States of America and a clearly insane person, had called out the dogs. The quote-unquote threat had to be snuffed out. Garland, if you'll remember, also had an axe to grind. Because of the election of Donald Trump and one of the rare good things done by Senator Mitch McConnell, he had been stymied by the congressional Republicans of being nominated to the Supreme Court. That seat instead going to Neil Gorsuch when Donald Trump entered the White House in 2017. He was out for blood and made no bones about it. The scarier thing was that Garland was far from the only person who Joe Biden let off the leash when it came to quote-unquote white supremacy and the threat of quote-unquote white supremacy that was apparently sweeping the nation. The man who Garland apparently talked to before stepping on that stage was Alejandro Mayorkas, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, who was then overseeing one of the greatest crimes ever committed by the U.S. government in our history, the invasion of our country by foreign nationals through our southern border, which he should be in prison for. God help deliver us from the threat of 20-year-old college kids who can't get a date on a Reddit thread, says the man who allowed 20 million unvetted people into our country through our southern border. Christopher Wray, the then head of the FBI and a Republican, by the way, was in on the ruse as well. In several congressional hearings and testimonies, Wray said similar. Young white men were a threat, so much so that, according to the head of what would become the equivalent of the Stasi under the Biden administration, they were on the same level as ISIS. Wray leveraged this fear-mongering to throw dozens of Donald Trump's political allies, including Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, Roger Stone, George Papadopoulos, and even almost Donald Trump himself into prison, as well as wage a covert war against his citizen supporters. Grandmothers were thrown into prison for protesting at an abortion clinic, or praying out of an abortion clinic, rather. School board moms had their license plates tapped. Everything and above was on the lam for the democratic justice system, which in turn was an injustice system. It's hard to believe that was almost 3.5 years ago. Regardless of what you think of the current trajectory of Donald Trump's second term, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago, at least we aren't doing that anymore. That's progress. But the most interesting thing about the war against young men, predominantly young white men in America, is not that it's immoral, which it obviously is. Rather, the most interesting thing about the war against young, predominantly white men is that the reason for its waging is simply inaccurate. It's not true. The entire premise for its purpose was and is to this day built on a complete and total lie. And what is that lie? Well, that young American men are becoming, quote unquote, increasingly radical, that due to factors like Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes and 4chan and violent pornography, young men are being bred into some form of subterranean mouth-breathing apes who are being groomed to turn the world totally upside down as we know it, that young white men are going to be the downfall of America because of their young whiteness, that young white men were the bane of existence, the scourge of our society, which is why we had to label them toxic, exclude them from job opportunities and scholarships, and turn every other identity group in this country against them all at once. The goal wasn't to advocate for any other group. It was to destroy this one completely. But no one has stopped to ask the fundamental question for a reason. Is it true? Is this actually happening? There was no dialogue about the quote-unquote radicalization of young men issue at all. It was like a sudden societal switch had flipped. Young men were now the problem and needed to be excoriated for it. They must be hunted down, shamed, attacked, and vilified at every turn for everything. Not a single person and not a single man, most shamefully of all in institutional power, stood up and said what this obviously was: demonic, sinful, and wrong. So let's answer that question that no one has had the guts to. Is it true that over the past 20 years, when all this dialogue started to kick up, young American men have been, quote unquote, increasingly radicalized? The answer to that question, by all available data, one that has been ignored and suppressed by all who benefited from the original lie, will be shocking to some and not shocking to others. No, not at all, actually. Up until very recently, until the end of 2024, where there was a spike after the election, American men have stayed remarkably normal. The biggest spike in the data, as cited by Gallup in a poll that broke the entire narrative wide open a couple of weeks ago, was, as most people figured, in the aftermath of, like I said, the 2024 election. And that was only by 3 points. As it turns out, young men in this poll, cited between the ages of 18 and 29, do not want to turn America into some cauldron of psychopathic red pill nut house where women don't have rights, black people can't vote, and people's rights are taken away as wholesale. Men who have always leaned more right than women, to be fair, want, generally speaking, what they've always wanted: the ability to be a man in the way that, quote unquote, being a man traditionally meant: having meaningful work, going to church, providing for a family, watching football and golf on the weekends, live a nice life that is promised in the American dream for all those who pursue it admirably. An inconvenient narrative for all those who wanted so desperately to create another one, to be certain. This says many things. First, American men should be commended for this, and highly so. Young men, particularly within the past decade, have taken an absolute cultural shellacking. The Smithsonian made an exhibit about how white patriarchy was the bane of the existence of America. The Fortune 500 completely turned against them. Hollywood lampooned and mocked them. Political and social leaders ignored them, even as they shoved guns in their mouth, drowned themselves in alcohol and pornography, and numb themselves out of their skulls with pills and weed. In any other situation like this is not the norm. The norm, in most cases where one demographic is vilified as much as American young men were, is revolution. Most other groups of people, regardless of who they are and what they look like, would have committed a revolt to such a degree that respect was not only paid, but owed back in spades. There is no group more capable of revolution, by the way, than young men. They are the strongest and toughest demographic on the planet by a biological mile, to put it at a minimum. But that didn't happen. Young men simply hunkered down, took the pounding, and stood back up. The resiliency of this is something to be commended. I have been in the space of men's self-improvement, of helping men, for a very long time. It took me seeing that Gallup poll to be reminded of, even though young men are not perfect, they are at least capable of what they were always capable of deep down. Absolutely immense amounts of resilience and pain tolerance. Second, on a more negative note, this speaks to the increasing passivity of American men. One thing this study showed is that a primary driver of this lack of drift is that men are withdrawing, which is absolutely true. As mentioned, this behavior towards any demographic of society by that society is unacceptable for any group of people. The lack of a revolution, while also being a byproduct of the self-control of the more righteous of men, is also an indictment on the more passive men of this culture. Men have stood on the sidelines for far too long, young men in particular. Society owes you nothing, but there is something you can go out, seek, and take as a man in that society. That is the birthright of all men, and something that all men should seek should they want to live a fulfilled life as a man. The cultural beatdown that men have taken over the years has led to a dulling of that masculine desire, an enforcement mechanism used to beat them into submission to get what they want out of men, which is for them to be cowardly, impotent, and weak. Too many young men have been encouraged and compelled to take this road, and it's only led to their destruction. Men were not meant to be idle because God made men to create, cultivate, and work. When men don't lead, when men choose to be passive, bad things happen, both to ourselves and those around us that we love. On this side, the fact that young men have not been more radicalized is, kind of be honest, disappointing. For the sake alone that if young men were more radicalized, at least they would have the nerve to do something about their situation. Third, and more importantly, this Gallup poll speaks to the larger narrative of who is actually getting radicalized. Contrary to the popular narrative, this demographic has become rapidly more radicalized, to the point of necessary societal intervention. They have become the most deranged, rabid, and wild group of people in our country by a wide margin. And of course, it's the exact opposite demographic of what our society would want you to believe, which is why, of course, it has told us that lie for more than 2 decades. Young women. In that same Gallup poll that showed young men between the ages of 18 to 29 staying very even-keeled throughout the societal upheaval of the past 20 years, young women have showed a stark opposite movement and reaction. In one of the most remarkable visuals you will ever see, young women have moved to the political left by an absolutely astounding 20 points, by contrast of only 3 to the right for men, a 23-point difference in the value systems of the American gender politic. Young women at the time of this writing had become the only reliable voter base the American left has left to work with, particularly in the aftermath of the 2024 election when the Big Ten of Donald Trump's MAGA movement demolished inroads they had made with Black, Hispanic, and even Muslim voters. The only group that stayed with the ticket of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz was that of young, college-educated women. So by necessity, when you need someone or something for survival, you do what you can to curtail your messaging to them, to bring them under your wing, to massage them and make them feel welcome into your good graces. In other words, you give them everything that they want, because you have to. You can't just not say no. You can't afford to say no to anything. I've talked many times on this show about how young women have never been more physically beautiful, and simultaneously have never been more spiritually ugly. This incentive structure, this leftist pull inside the hearts and minds of young women, is one of the biggest root causes. It's not that young men and young women don't find each other attractive physically. They more than likely do, because they always have and always will. Rather, the reason why this radicalizing split in gender differences on the basis of politics and values between men and women is the most underrated societal catastrophe in modern America is that young women have become Jacobins. They cannot see anything in the way that men do anymore. They have become so coddled by society that they have been compelled to give absolutely everything so that they can no longer survive in a world where that doesn't happen. This means one dangerous and horrifying thing for our society. Anything goes when it comes to women. Consequences are void. Discipline and punishment cannot be doled out under any circumstances. And this has led young women to abandon anything resembling traditional femininity. An alarming number of young women have no desire to be a mother or to have a family. We have forced the narrative that women need to be independent, that depending on themselves for everything is going to fulfill them and make them happy. We have held up the idols of career, credentialism, financial gain, and materialism in front of their eyes, captivating them in a trance and pulling them away from all things that used to give women value, while yanking down the levers of all of our primary institutions in our culture to enforce it with brute strength. Yet the self-own for all of this, and for all of these women, is the following. No matter how much they want to run from the traditional constructs of their gender, they can't run far. In the words of Gerard Carmichael, exactly what you run from, you end up chasing. Women, like men, can never run from who they are for long. They will always regress to the mean. There will always be nurturers, guarding people they feel they need to protect. The motherly instinct is impossible to stamp out, no matter how women try to spin it otherwise. And examples of this is everywhere. For example, remember the woman Jessie Kelly dubbed Big Chungus at the No Kings rally? The fat woman who held up the gun signal with her hand to her neck to mock Charlie Kirk getting his neck blown out on video? She was at a No Kings protest, a movement funded by leftist movements like George Soros and the Open Society Foundation and other left-wing entities who want to fund this destruction of women as we've seen it. She, like others, is miserable. No kids, no family, no purpose, other than a debased and demonic motherly instinct that has been hijacked by the puppeteers she has pledged her allegiance to. How about Renee Good, the woman who tried to run over a federal law enforcement officer with a car? She was protesting against ICE, who were in her home state of Minnesota to deport illegal immigrants and investigate fraud. You see how twisted this story gets? You're coming after my helpless, my babies, the innocent, poor Mexican and Somali immigrants who are dependent on the primary organization that I fund, the federal government, for help. Get in the way of them thriving, and I'll put your head under my tire. Or how about the throngs of young women at Howard University, where Kamala Harris seeded the election of Donald Trump? All of them crying hysterically, in complete disbelief that everything their ideology represented had been rejected. They just wanted to help, they claimed, to uplift the marginalized, to lift up the oppressed. In other words, I want to be a mom. I want to be feminine. But now, because of how deep this rot has sunken into my brain, I can't. Young women are struggling immensely. Their brains have been hijacked by the cultural forces that simply want to use them as cogs in their grand machine. If we do not focus on the rapid radicalization of young American women, we will lose them permanently. Families will stop forming. Our birth and marriage rates will continue to plummet. We will completely lose an entire generation to a cult. No one is above repentance. But before repentance, honesty must come along for the ride first. All right, so let's get into this. So the reason why Gen Z women in particular have been radicalized, my generation of women have been radicalized, and millennials I'm sure have, but it's really manifesting now. Like I said, that Gallup poll that's on the internet, I encourage all of you to look it up. There's been a lot of articles that have been around from it. There's another great article I talked with this about with my friend Brian Rogers in his show the other day called The Great Feminization that also looks into this. But really it's that poll that I want to focus on because that was really troubling data to perceive. And that is focused on 18 to 29-year-old men and women and where their differences lie, where the priorities lie, everything like that. And it's really discouraging in many ways. And so the reason why all of this is not only wrong but sinister, like this is evil, what's going on with young women today. Not that the young women are evil. I think a lot of them are just misguided, but the forces and the cultural enforcement that is driving this evil, that is this spirit of the age that is infecting the minds of young women is because, as I mentioned, the institutions and the people who run them have taken all of the virtues of femininity and inverted them so they have gone completely off the rails. Colleges, corporate boardrooms, the family structure, everything like that. Completely inverted the role of women. And now, because of that, women, like men, the Jordan Peterson quote that's going to be immortalized, young women today are where young men were 10 years ago. The problem with young men 10 years ago is that we had no idea what to tell young men about what being a man is. That is exactly where we are with women today. Young women have no idea what it means to be a woman. What is a woman? We don't know. We can't even get the biology right. God help us with the psychology and the mentality and the spiritual element of this. And the answer to that question, in my view, is that women are still behaving as women have traditionally behaved. That part has not changed. But now they are being directed into something that is anti-woman, the opposite of what femininity means, the opposite of what being a woman means. And like I said, something that's evil. Because something that is evil is against the natural order of things. The natural order of the way things work, that society works, that everything works inside of itself. And young women are being driven to all of these places by these cultural forces. And I think there are 3 reasons for this. So the first reason as to why and how Gen Z women have been so radicalized is because of bad narratives. So Jordan Peterson gets this right. My friend Hafiz Bayoku gets this right. The most important thing that you can tell yourself as a person, that the society that you're in can tell itself as a society, and later trickles down to cities and families and communities and children and husband, wives, everything, are the stories that you tell yourself. Your self-narrative, the narrative of a culture, the narrative of a society, the narrative of everything determines much of where you end up in life. And for women, as a culture, as a demographic of people, for young women, the first thing you always have to do when starting a revolution, you can look into any revolution that has ever happened. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks, the Spanish Civil War, everything. This is always what happens. And it happens inside of societies too. It happens with, it's happened with different social movements. It's happened with different demographics of people, with different socioeconomic groups. I mean, if this is the playbook of revolution, of destruction. You take a narrative that works, which for women has been the traditional feminine narrative. We'll get to that throughout this entire show. And you have ripped that out and replaced it with something else. So we have taken a new revolutionary idea, which really isn't a revolutionary idea at all, put it in the heads of young women, and excommunicated the traditional feminine narrative and structure. What does this look like? Being a mom is oppressive. Being a wife is bad. Putting your career as your non-number one accomplishment is bad. Not having material possessions is a death sentence. Which really is not true. The data doesn't say that. But women believe that. It doesn't matter what data say. It doesn't matter that the rational conclusion to come to, especially with women, because women are naturally more emotional than men, what matters is the feeling. What matters is the story. What matters is the emotions that rise to the top when that story is told. And so we got rid of all those things. We completely deplatformed motherhood, being a wife, traditional living, etc. And we have replaced those as a culture with the idol of feminism and the the fruits of that idol of feminism: career, status, sexual freedom, liberation, which is really bondage. And what this all comes down to, I think it's really interesting, is that it's really turned women into a diet version of a man, a light beer version of masculinity, is what we have with femininity now. Because we have subjugated women instead of elevating women in the things that they naturally do better than men, and we have put them under men in all of the areas that women, for the most part, I'm generalizing here, do not do well or as well in doing than men do. Chasing status, having lots of sex, climbing the corporate ladder, starting companies, whatever. Not saying that women can't do that. Some women can. But most women, that's not going to be their priority in life, if we're really being honest about it. And so what this has done what feminism has done and all of this stuff that has come from feminism, it's destroyed women as a construct. And instead, it's just made them a group of subpar men. Like, women, in the eyes of this culture, do not exist. We are, literally in some cases, because we don't believe in gender anymore. So now we're just some uniform, sexless, genderless, ethoslessness. I don't even know if that's a word, but I'm going to go with it. Everyone is the same. And when everyone is the same, the only thing that matters is natural selection. This is Darwin's point. When everything is equated, everything is a competition, then only the strong survive. And in all of the cases that matter in this social Darwinist competitive society that we've made, women don't stand a chance in that way. When we play the game that men have to play, women are going to get destroyed every single time. And this is what we're seeing with this rapid swing to leftism, this rapid rise in mental illness, this rapid rise in SSRIs and antidepressants and all these things. This is all a result of this mentality, of this culture. And so we replaced the stories. And then the second thing that we did as a culture, and this is, I think, the truly evil thing that's really happened, is that not only have we destroyed the concept of what being a woman means, we have taken the inherent virtues of womanhood, of femininity, and the instincts that are placed in you by God, not by nature, but by God, and we have hijacked them. So this is what I was meaning by the Renee Good thing, by all the crazy women that are at these ICE protests, the No Kings protests, all the women online, which was mostly women, by the way, all of them that celebrated Charlie Kirk's assassination, all women, if you look at it. I don't think I saw a single, and I'm sure there are out there, but like in the big ones that were celebrating Charlie getting shot on camera, I didn't see a single man make a TikTok about that. A single one. It was all crazy young women hopped up on SSRIs, thinking that this was some kind of victory for the culture, that Charlie Kirk got murdered on live TV. And so why they think that is that the cultural influences that are influencing women to veer off in this direction still understand that these women have natural instincts inside of their biology. You can't get rid of biology, no matter how hard we try. No matter how many surgeries you do, how many hormone blockers you do, how many injections you can do, your body is your body, your biology is your biology, period, point blank, full stop. That will never change. And these actors, these leftist actors, have hijacked these feminine instincts and have simply directed them and hijacked them into leftist causes. What are these leftist causes? Allie Beth Stuckey has hit a home run on this for a really long time. And Allie Beth has this phrase called toxic empathy. Women are naturally empathetic people, and that's amazing. Men are naturally not as that way. Women are that way. But when that empathy is moved into a different direction and used to promote a political agenda and not a spiritual, natural-born agenda, that's a problem. That's a big problem. That's an issue. And so what does this look like? Instead of the motherly nurturing instinct that is supposed to be for family, children, community, church, etc., they have now directed that to things like illegal immigration, abortion, caring for the homeless, whatever that means. Policies that are quote-unquote empathetic and that care for people. Radicalizing. Just as women were radicalized to take care of their families, women are now taking care of social causes and are being used as tools to further those social causes. And finally, there has been a massive removal. The third thing that's led to this radicalization of young women, is that we have removed all consequences for women. Women cannot be punished anymore. Women cannot be told no anymore. Women cannot be told to sit down, shut up, and be quiet anymore. When's the last time you've heard that from anybody? And I'm not saying we should do that to be mean at all. But what I am saying is that when you step out of line, no matter what your gender is, no matter what your race is, no matter what anything is, that doesn't matter. But when you step out of line, when you do something morally wrong, you need to have punishment for it. You need to. And so women now being viewed as a protected class, quote unquote, which is ridiculous, because how can you protect half the world's population and what are you protecting them from? I still don't know how that works. This means that women can get away with this, with any behavior, no matter how heinous they get, no matter how wild they act on social media, which has allowed women, bad behavior always corrupts even further than we initially anticipated doing. It has allowed women to seep further and further and further into the destruction they have moved along on this path. It has allowed women to descend into this, again, weird, demonic, countercultural, nonsensical, satanic way of thinking that has completely destroyed young women in America, completely destroyed them. And the data's coming in on this, and we can pretend to ignore it all we want, but young men are not the one with the radicalization problem. Young women are. And that's a problem. It would be a problem if that was true with young men, but it's not true with young men. It's true with young women. And if we cared about young women, we need to fix that. And so this is, a lot of people are going to clip this and they're going to say it's anti-woman. It's not. I love women. I care about women. But caring about people means telling people that what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And women have been told what they want to hear for far too long. And we need to get real, and we need to have an actual conversation about this. Because if we don't, they will continue to spiral. And I don't want young women to spiral. And the people that do are actually the ones that claim they want to help them. But they don't. And I think that's evident from all the available data, the resources, everything. Okay, so young women are crazy, like literally. You can go to the data that's proven by data. And young men, some of them are nuts. We'll get to some of those in a second. But young men gradually, on the other hand, have been not radicalized. The data shows that too. And so let's look at that now. Let's look at the opposite side of this coin. So I think this is really remarkable. I touched on this in my monologue, but young men have been just hit in the face over and over and over and over and over again by American culture for as long as I've been alive. Like I grew up in this, I was baked right into this cake, right into this stew of this culture. It's all I've ever known, really, is this just kind of unending, unrelenting assault on masculinity, on male role models, on all of these things, really. And now I see men settle back into their traditional roles, into traditionally masculine roles. So men for a very long time were encouraged to be more emotional, open up about their feelings, don't be rational, don't be stoic, don't be whatever. Anything that you do in that vein is toxic, so go away from that. And now I see men kind of coming back to earth a little bit. Men are less emotional, more logical. They're more rational now, who are moving forward with integrity, with silent masculinity, with this stoic nature that has defined masculinity since the dawn of time, really. And this same trend of the radicalization of young women, to great irony of all the people who want to tell the narrative, has worked in the complete inverse for men than for women. Men are pretty normal. Like, they're a bunch of normies, really, when you look at what normal has meant for the longest time. And so why is that? Like, why is that happening? And I think the reason why that's happening is for a couple of reasons as well. So first and foremost, the assault on men, and I'm seeing this clearly more now than I ever have, and I think it didn't take me necessarily a long time to come up with this. I just think what were the lines, I think was the biggest question that I had in my mind. And really, this assault on men, this full-facing assault on masculinity has divided American men in more ways than I could have ever anticipated, which is interesting because you would think that when a whole demographic is hit over and over and over again, that those people would hunker down, unify, etc., like young women have. But the reason why men have not been as collectively radicalized as young women have is that unlike women, they are not as uniform, meaning they don't stick together as much. And that's just a gender difference. Like, men are far more tribal and competitive with one another in that way when under assault and when under attack than young women are. Young women stick together. Young men are much more isolatory. They're much more singular. They don't really group well together with other women. They're much less cliquey in that way. And so and men, when they're in a foxhole together, when they're on a football team together, that's different. But when you take a very broad coalition of men, like the American male population, the young American male population, it's gonna splinter more than women are. That's just a gender difference. And so what I'm seeing now is really interesting. We're gonna get to this later on in the show as well. But this really has two primary outgrowths when we've split the young male demographic in this country. You have traditionally masculine men, as mentioned, the ones who are clinging to the virtues of masculinity as it was throughout the entire trajectory of American life, if I'm being honest. And on the other side of that, and I think this is a less group of men than people think, which is a good thing, and we'll get to that in a second too. But in the other demographic, you have men who are acting out in various ways. And this can manifest in a lot of different ways. This is men who are leftists, like the male feminist crowd, the men who are at No Kings protest, the guys who are protesting ICE. That's a demographic of men. Red pill men, guys who listen to like Andrew Tate and Myron Gaines and Sneeko and Fresh and Fit and all the red pill demons that inhabit these cretin spheres in the internet. And black pill men, primarily the groypers, incel movement, all those type of things. MGTOW, all of whom are unified. And you look at that kind of panacea of men, like leftist men, red pill men, black pill men, groypers, Andrew Tate people, and you think that they have nothing in common because they all look differently. Like Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate could not be more different from an outside perspective. But if you look at the inside of what they preach, what their ideology is, and this includes leftists, because apparently Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate are against the left, but they really promote an ideology that's very similar to the left, which is hilarious. But all of them are unified around a victim ideology peddled by influencers. They're all victims. Groypers are victims. Red pill guys are victims. Leftists are victims. Alphas are victims. Groypers are victims. All of them are. And so it is about the people who do not see, the men who do not see themselves as victims, traditionally masculine men, because that's what traditional masculinity promotes, a non-victim ideology, and then a victim ideology promoted by that other crowd of manosphere, alt-manosphere young men, speakers. So that's the first thing. The second reason why young men did not become radicalized is that we got over time bolder actors that started to speak out on behalf of young men. So as more people started to notice this, as more people started to pay attention to the plights of young men, after a while, there were several people who were very brave who began to stick up for men, which began to, again, slowly but surely seep into the culture. And so, since the masculine conversation was crowded out of the culture, it had to take place in the manosphere. It had to take place on the corners of the internet, on podcasts, on YouTube channels, on live streams, on a bunch of different things. And so as those platforms started to grow and become more influential to influence broader American culture, Joe Rogan, Theo Von, Scott Galloway, Jason Wilson, Jocko Willink, name your person. And they all talk about different things, and they all talk about different ways of seeing the structure. The Red Pill guys are in this as well. Nick Fuentes is absolutely in this conversation too. But this alternate conversation, you had people that started to speak out. Joe Rogan, as mentioned, lots of other guys started to say, hey, this isn't right, what we're doing to these young guys. Like, this isn't right. And we need to do something about this because this is not good. And so that conversation being had was something that was not happening a lot in the older days of the manosphere, masculine space, whatever you want to call it. It had to take place there because there just needed to be a conversation around that needed to take place, but it was still very much alive. It wasn't gone. It was very, very much alive. And this led to the explosion that we're now seeing in a true, what I believe and what I pray, is a revival of traditional masculinity in America. And so what we're seeing now, so the young men of America split into these two factions. Influencers started to talk about all this stuff and have this debate in public. Tucker Carlson's involved in this. Lots of other people are involved in this. What is a man? What makes a man? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now what we're seeing is that the great thing about free speech, the great thing about ideas, the great thing about this conversation, whether it's about masculinity or gender or Israel or Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever, everyone can have an opinion. I encourage everyone to have an opinion. I encourage them to share their opinions. But the thing about sharing opinions is that better ideas always win in the end. They always win. The cream always rises to the top. The wheat always gets separated from the chaff. And the same thing I believe and I hope and I pray is happening to men right now. We are seeing a masculine revival towards tradition, towards masculinity, towards what masculinity actually looks like, towards young men who want to pursue the things of masculinity, the fruits of masculinity. And I believe that we're beginning to see an unraveling of the other side of the coin. I think the red pill's dying. I think the Groyper movement is dying. I think the doomerism movement is dying. I think the incel movement is dying. And I pray that it does. And I pray that those young men can come out of it and see the light, but I hope that that ideology dies, that victim ideology dies, that resentment politics, that grievance politics ideology is dying. The cream always rises to the top. And the same is true with the conversation around masculinity. The cream will always rise to the top. The good men will always win. The good always overtakes the bad. John 1:5, where, John writes, the darkness and the light were coexisting, but the darkness has not overcome the light. I love that. It's one of my favorite Bible verses, John 1:5. And the same is true with everything. Because if we allow things to be available in the public sphere, if we allow people to talk, to see things, to do whatever, the good always wins. And that's a very good thing for all of us, not only around the masculinity conversation, but around all the conversations generally. And I think for men especially, this is going to matter a lot in the future, and I'm really, really glad that this is happening. So on the point of the whole, the incel movement, whatever dying out, I think that this is a very thing, or not the incel movement, but really the alt-manosphere movement, the Groypers, the red pill guys, the black pill guys, the MGTOW guys, the incels, the whatever. I think that movement's dying. This grievance masculinity, this resentment masculinity, I think it's dying. And I hope it is. But I think I have evidence of that. And it might come in a very place that people don't expect, but I think this is true. So I saw this on X over the weekend. Apparently, there was a movement, I believe this is in Miami. There was a meetup in Miami for it was funny, people called it like the incel Avengers that were meeting together, or the Manosphere Avengers or whatever. It was like Andrew and Tristan Tate and Sneeko, and I think Myron Gaines was in there, and Justin Waller was there, and Nick Fuentes was there, and I'm like, wow, Nick Fuentes made it out of the basement, hallelujah. And so I saw like this guy, like the picture is so funny. I'm gonna look it up, and it's gonna be the thumbnail in this video, but it's so wild that happened. I was like, it's like the ultimate culmination of all the villains of the modern day manosphere and people and all the people that people hate and everything like that. And there was a video that went around. There's the song that Kanye made about Hitler, and they played it in the club, and everyone's like, oh, look at the Hitler song, and all the guys looking about the Hitler song, whatever. And so that video broke the internet, and it made the rounds on social media, and everyone was like, this is the thing that Tucker Carlson platformed, and blah, 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 blah. And okay, and so there was a big fuss made up about this. And this is wild for several reasons. So first of all, Nick Fuentes got out of the basement. He went outside. I've never seen Nick Fuentes outside before, only in that picture where he was at that one rally. He made it out of the basement, so good for Nick Fuentes. Truly, good for Nick Fuentes. He got outside. I'm happy about that. And I think this proves my point. The second thing I want to say, this is why this is wild. People like to think that the Tate red pill stuff and the Fuentes Groyper stuff and the red pill and the black pill, they think it's all different. And they're like, oh, this is a thing that's pulling people in different directions. And there are some disagreements on the margins for sure. But this is what I meant by this is a unification of both sides of the dissident alt masculinity movement, the alternate manosphere that have been distorted. It's the coming out party for many sides of the manosphere that no one really saw coming. Like, these guys are boys, these guys are friends. And it looked like they had fun. And I hope they had fun and everything, like, whatever. It looked fun. In Tim Dillon's words, this is fun. We're having fun. But that was a wild thing to see. And a lot of people were very upset about this. And they're like, well, this is what we were talking about. This is why men and young men need to be stomped out and toxic masculinity and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, Karen, shut up. But I saw something else when I saw that picture. I saw that picture. I saw those videos. And on one hand, I was very sad by that, truly. And on the other hand, I was very encouraged by that. And so these 2 points, they coalesce onto something that I think is important to talk about, which is, I think this is truly the death of the alt manosphere movement. I think the red pill's dying. I think the black pill's dying. I think the Groypers are dying. I think the MGTOW movement's dying. I think all of this stuff, this chauvinist, nihilist, black pill, red pill, alternate masculinity stuff is dying out. And I think that video, especially with them dancing to the Hitler song by Kanye, this seemed to me, and I could be very wrong about this, but I don't think I am. This seemed to me to be a travesty of a PR blunder on the account of all the people in that video. The Tate brothers, Justin Waller, Sneeko, Fuentes, all these guys. Because everything about that video and that content and that picture had nothing to do with masculinity, with being a man. In fact, it was the opposite of that. It was a reflection of boyhood. Because think about what was going on that night at that club. They're laughing about a song about Nazis, like middle school boys do when they tell Holocaust jokes in the bathroom, or they use a swear word for the first time. They're giggling to themselves in the back of the class. And the dork teacher up front that teaches English to middle school 7th grade boys is getting picked on by them. They're in a nightclub, popping bottles, doing the whole dancing thing, whatever, doing the 6-7 dance. They got hot girls around them wearing no clothes and, talking about how, women shouldn't vote or something, whatever. It's like when you, and I'm noticing this more as I get older, I just turned 28 in October, but I'm noticing this more and more as I get older. Like, Andrew Tate is 40 years old. Nick Fuentes is my age. Waller is older than Andrew Tate is. Like, these are not young men, except with the exception of Fuentes, who's an older young guy like me, but still a young guy, but older like I am. I think Fuentes actually might be younger than I am by about a year, but that doesn't matter. Like, grow up. Grow up. Like, really? Like, there's nothing masculine about that picture, that video at all. And that is exactly what is wrong with that ideology and why it's falling apart. Because that ideology, no matter what flavor it is, no matter how you slice it, is a picture, is a living manifestation of the immaturity that defines this movement of masculinity. And I hate to say that I called it, but I called it. On December 8th, 2023, I wrote a book called Toxic Immaturity. And this is the full manifestation of toxic immaturity in that video at that meetup with all of those quote-unquote masculinity influencers. So I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. You can look it up. It's behind me right now. That the thesis of that book was the anti-masculine movement, defined by immaturity of men, which is why men are getting set back. It is because of men that men have the problems we have. It's not because of feminism, not because of women, not because of the culture, not because of the government, not because of blah, 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 blah. It's because of men. It's our fault. We have not taken ownership of our masculinity, and therefore our masculinity has been outsourced to the culture, which has been used to clobber us. Period. Point blank, full stop. And nothing proves this more, like what we saw in those videos. Because actually masculine men like me, not saying I'm some sort of alpha or whatever, but I consider myself a masculine guy. Masculine men like me, my friends, who are some of the best men I know, saw that video, or probably they didn't even see that content because they don't live on social media like all these guys do. But actually masculine men saw that video, saw that picture, and like me, were turned off. Like I was. You know why? Because masculine men don't think that's cool. They don't think that's fun. Going to a club when you're 40 years old is not cool. Hanging out with women who are half naked on the internet in a section at a club is not cool. Saying that the Jews are the problem with reason why your life sucks is not cool. And again, this is going to turn into at some point, Jordan Peterson is right about everything podcast, but Jordan Peterson got this absolutely right where he said, this is where this leads. This is Pleasure Island in Pinocchio. This is Neverland for Peter Pan. This is stunted masculinity. This is delayed adolescence, only with supercars and money and tattoos that go all the way up your sleeves and bottles and nightclubs and swear words. It's no different than Pinocchio. It's no different than Peter Pan. And this is the self-own about this alt-manosphere movement that's happened. And again, really why it's no different than the movement that has hijacked feminism and women that we started this episode with. And that truth is that you can't stop men from wanting to be men. You can't. You cannot stop it. Manhood is defined by responsibility, not by hedonism. Men want to be dads. Men want to own things. Men want to be husbands. Men want to work hard. Men want to go to church. They have no time for this foolishness, for this nonsense, which is all that has happened on the other side of the masculinity argument. And that video was the great, it's like the end of a Scooby-Doo episode. They're pulling the mask off the bad guy and they see who the person is. This was the great unmasking for the Andrew Tate, Nick Fuentes, red pill, nihilist, black pill, whatever you want to call it, whatever euphemism you want to use. That was the end of it. That killed it. At least I hope it did. Because it needs to die. It needs to die. And hopefully, if other men have the courage to call this out, I think it will die. Because it should die. Because bad ideas have no place in our culture. And this is a very bad idea that's gone on for far too long. Okay, so because of that, let's land the plane with some optimism. Oh, that was an optimistic thing we just talked about. So I think that men are on the right track. But the antidote to this problem is exactly what I proposed. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't think that I do. But I believe the antidote to this problem of women, problem of men, problem of toxic immaturity on both sides of the aisle, problem of women becoming more radicalized, is for men to inhabit their God-given role and lead and help women Men must lead here. We must provide solutions here, or else none of this will get solved and nothing will get better on any front. If men do not lead, if men stay passive, this conversation will continue to deteriorate and get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And it will happen as rapidly as it's happening now, if not more so. So men need to lead from the front and say, we're not doing this anymore. We're not doing that anymore. I will not tolerate that anymore. I'm putting my foot down. And so as a culture, with men leading, we need to put these narratives to bed. We need to make sure that women and men are what men and women want, because if we continue down this path where we're bifurcating this much, where women, by the way, are bifurcating in this path, we will not have a society. Our civilization will collapse. This is civilizational suicide we're looking at here. I'm not exaggerating this point. This is absolutely what's going to happen. And so to do that with young women, we need to do the opposite of what's gotten them there. So number one, we need to purge these narratives. We need to tell new stories about womanhood, about femininity, and everything in between. Because the narratives that are being told to women now have absolutely nothing to do with being a woman in a constructive way and what a woman is in a constructive way. It is anti-woman. As I said, the whole purpose of this movement and why women are so unhappy right now is because they're being told to be a subpar version of what a man is. And that doesn't work for anything. It doesn't work for women, doesn't work for men, doesn't work for anybody. And we need those to be removed as soon as possible. And men need to lead the charge. I will not tolerate this. This is not happening anymore. Not in my country, not with my family, not with anybody. Period, point blank, full stop. There needs to be a new standard, a new precedent set for the conduct and the behavior of women and men, culturally reinforced, which leads to the second thing, which is consequences. There needs to be consequences for this type of behavior, for men and for women. For the red pill, nihilist, whatever guys, the alt manosphere, there needs to be consequences for that behavior. For the influencers of that behavior, because young men are paying the cost for all of those who are influenced by them. And young women are as well, for all of the feminist influences that are affecting them. There needs to be consequences for women like Alex Cooper for infecting young women with this ideology. There needs to be consequences. And I think the consequences break out into two primary forms. Number one, we need to show women that the grass is greener on the other side, that they're wrong, and they're making themselves miserable. And there needs to be some sort of a societal shaming incident for both men and for women, but women in particular when we're talking about this case. And shame has become a bad word in our culture, but we need shame in our culture because shame works. Shame works. And women respond to both well because women are social creatures. And this is not going to be like mocking them on social media. This is not, although in some cases for Alex Cooper, I think she should be mocked on social media for sure. But in abstract, women need to understand. Women need to know what everyone needs to know. The number one truth of life: your decisions have consequences. Your decisions can either enable or cost you your happiness. And that same shaming effect that society has had on them needs to be put on the other foot. Period, point blank, full stop. They've shamed the culture, and it's not worked out for the culture or for them. So we need to correct that. And we need to do it in love and be nice about it and whatever. But we need to be firm about it as well, because it doesn't work if we're not. And then, finally, and most importantly in my view, we need to encourage actual feminine instincts. Women need to be told that being a woman, being a traditional woman, is not a bad thing at all. Women must be told that femininity is good, that being a woman is good, that having the desires of femininity and womanhood are not bad. And this is just, women have been sold up a river for years. about what being a woman is, what is important about womanhood, what is X, Y, and Z. And we, again, men have to lead here, but we need to say and champion what we want to see. Say more of what you want to see more of. And what men want, and I think what women want as well, is just that. They want to be feminine. They want to be women. They want to have the desires that are embedded by God of all women. They want that. And men want that. And they're not getting that from our culture now. And if we're going to stop this radicalization, we need to cut it off at the root, which is where this is. Because if we don't have a future as a society. We won't have America. We won't have marriage. We won't have all of these wonderful relations between men and women. We won't have any of that. But to make sure that that doesn't happen, we need to do something about it. And the way we do something about it is by simply enforcing it and encouraging women that being a woman is good and being a woman is okay. And you don't have to fall for the BS that society has sold people for years. And if they want to do that, that should be punished in a respectful way, but it needs to be punished. And we need to do that. It's a tough conversation we need to have, but we need to have it. Because what's the alternative? We know that now. We're living it now. It's not good. And so if we want something to be good, we need to put something good in its place, which is, in my view, this scenario. Thank you all for watching. Own the day. Open your mind. And I'll see you next week.